Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Margaret Thompson, a devoted mother betrayed by her son's cruel text who reclaims her independence, confronts ingratitude, and embarks on a journey of self-discovery. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly videos uncovering heartfelt truths. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The daisies were still damp with morning dew when I arranged them in the guest bedroom, their delicate petals trembling in the vase, as if they sensed the storm brewing in my life. I, Margaret Thompson, 64 years old, stood in the room that had once been my son Bradley's sanctuary, a place of laughter, whispered dreams, and the kind of love that binds a mother and child against the world's cruelties. The hardwood floor gleamed under the late afternoon sun, and the air carried the faint scent of lavender from the sachets I'd tucked into the drawers. Everything was perfect, or so I thought until my phone buzzed with a message that shattered the illusion I'd built over decades. The text glowed on the screen, its words slicing through me like a blade hidden in silk. "You're uninvited to our cruise, Mom. Ashley doesn't want to babysit an old lady." My fingers went numb and the phone slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. The screen spiderwebbed, but the damage to my heart was far worse. Bradley, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father's death, had just reduced me to a burden, a nuisance to be discarded. The daisies wilted in my vision, their vibrancy mocking the sudden grayness of my world. I stood frozen, staring at the broken phone as if it held answers to questions I hadn't yet dared to ask. Who had my son become? And who was I if not the mother who'd poured every ounce of herself into his dreams? The room, with its familiar walls and memories, felt like a stage where the script had been rewritten without my consent. But as the shock ebbed, something else stirred a whisper of defiance, a spark of something long buried beneath years of sacrifice. This wasn't just a text. It was a revelation, a key to a mystery I hadn't realized I was living. My name is Margaret Thompson, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I believed I knew my place in the world. For 30 years, it had been Bradley and me against the odds. His father, David, died when Bradley was 12, crushed in a construction accident that left me a widow and a single mother overnight. I'd been a high school literature teacher, weaving stories of heroes and villains for my students, while living my own quiet epic of survival. I worked late nights, grading papers, saved every penny for Bradley's college fund, and cheered at his architecture presentations, believing his dreams of building enduring structures were a testament to the life we'd forged together. Or so I thought. 3 weeks earlier, a card had arrived in the mail, its cheerful palm trees and turquoise waves promising a different kind of story. "Mom, Ashley, and I want you to join us for a Mediterranean cruise this summer." Our treat, Bradley had written in his meticulous handwriting. The invitation felt like a gift, a rare chance to bridge the distance that had grown between me and Ashley, his wife of 5 years. She'd always been polite, but guarded her smiles, never quite reaching her eyes. I'd hoped this trip would change that we'd find common ground under the Mediterranean sun. I'd thrown myself into preparations with a fervor I hadn't felt since my honeymoon 42 years ago. I spent $800 on cruise outfits, flowing dresses, wide-brimmed hats, sandals that sparkled in the light. I applied for my first passport, its blank pages a canvas for dreams I'd long shelved. I even treated myself to a professional pedicure. My toes painted a bold coral that felt like a declaration of joy. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, agreed to collect my mail, and I'd arranged for my garden to be watered during my month-long absence. Every night, I lay awake imagining conversations with Ashley, moments where we'd laugh over shared stories, where I'd finally feel like part of their family. But now, standing in the guest room with daisies scattered across the floor like fallen stars, I reread Bradley's message. The cruelty wasn't just in the words, but in their timing. The cruise was next week. My bags were packed downstairs, my itinerary tucked into a leather journal David had given me before he died. The house was ready for my absence, and I was ready for an adventure I'd earned through decades of selflessness. Yet Bradley's text revealed a truth I hadn't wanted to see. The family I'd built my life around no longer had room for me. I walked to the window, my reflection ghostly against the glass. Outside, the backyard stretched toward the horizon, where a rusted swing set stood as a relic of Bradley's childhood. He'd spent hours there, his small legs pumping as he told me he'd build houses that would last forever, structures that would stand as monuments to his dreams. I'd believed in those dreams, sacrificed for them, even bought him and Ashley a house as a wedding gift, a 3-bedroom colonial on Elmwood Street, where they could start their own legacy. But now those dreams felt like a mirage, and the swing set looked like a forgotten promise. My hands steadied as I picked up the cracked phone. No tears came, only a cold clarity that settled in my chest like frost on a winter morning. Bradley's words weren't just a rejection. They were a mirror showing me a son I no longer recognized, and a mother I'd let myself become accommodating, invisible, a shadow in my own life. But shadows have substance, and I was about to remind him of that. The house deed was in the kitchen drawer, a document I hadn't touched since the day I signed it 5 years ago. I'd given Bradley and Ashley the house, believing it was a gift of love, a foundation for their future. But as I crossed the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silent house, I realized love doesn't mean surrender. The deed was more than paper. It was a contract, one that Bradley had just broken in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. I sat at the kitchen table, the deed spread before me under the soft glow of a pendant light. My name stood alone as the owner, a detail I'd insisted on despite my lawyer's raised eyebrows. I'd structured the gift with conditions, respect, care, gratitude clauses that seemed unnecessary at the time, but now felt like prophecy. Bradley and Ashley thought they owned the house free and clear, but legal ownership and moral ownership are two different beasts. And I was about to unleash the latter. The phone rang, its cracked screen lighting up with Bradley's name. I let it go to voicemail, my heart pounding not with fear, but with purpose. His voice, when it came through, was rushed, defensive. "Mom, I know you're upset about the cruise, but Ashley really feels it's better this way. Call me back." Okay, I didn't call back. Instead, I dialed Margaret Caldwell, my attorney, a woman whose sharp mind and sharper wit had guided me through David's estate after his death. "Margaret," I said when she answered, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "I need to discuss the Elmwood Street property." Her pause was brief, professional. "The house you gave Bradley and Ashley." "What's going on, Margaret? I'll explain in person," I said. "Can we meet tomorrow?" "Of course," she replied, a note of curiosity in her tone. "But you sound different." I almost smiled. "I am." That night, I didn't sleep. I wandered through the house, touching objects that held pieces of my past. A photo of Bradley at his high school graduation, David's old travel books, a scarf I'd worn on our last family vacation before the accident. Each item was a thread in the tapestry of my life, but the pattern had shifted. Bradley's text wasn't just a betrayal. It was a key, unlocking a door I'd kept closed for too long. Behind that door was a woman I'd forgotten, one who'd once dreamed of far-off places, who'd laughed with David under starry skies, who'd believed she could be more than a mother, a widow, a sacrifice. By morning, the daisies in the guest room were gone, replaced by a single rose I had cut from my garden. It stood tall in the vase, its thorns a quiet warning. I drove to Margaret Caldwell's office, the deed tucked in my purse like a talisman. Her office was a study in contrasts. Modern glass walls and antique mahogany furniture, a blend of past and present that mirrored my own crossroads. She greeted me with a warm smile, but her eyes searched mine for clues. "Tell me everything," she said, settling behind her desk. I told her about the text, the cruise, the years of quiet concessions I'd made to keep Bradley happy. I told her about the house, the gift I'd given out of love, and the conditions I'd written into the deed conditions Bradley had violated with a single text. Margaret listened, her pen tapping rhythmically against a notepad, her expression unreadable until I finished. "You're within your rights to reclaim the property," she said finally. "The deed's conditions are clear: respect and care for the gift giver. Bradley's actions could be argued as a breach." "But Margaret, this is big." Are you sure? I met her gaze, my resolve as solid as the swing set in my backyard. "I've never been more sure." She nodded, a spark of admiration in her eyes. "Then let's get to work. We'll need to review the paperwork, notify Bradley and Ashley, and prepare for any pushback. They won't take this lightly." I know I said, but neither will I. As we pored over the documents, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't revenge, though it might look that way to an outsider. It was reclamation, a rewriting of the story I had been living. Bradley had shown me who he'd become, and now I would show him who I'd always been beneath the role of devoted mother. The mystery wasn't just in his betrayal. It was in the woman I was about to become. That evening, I returned home and opened David's travel books, their pages yellowed but alive with possibility. France, Italy, Ireland, places we'd promised to visit when we retired, dreams cut short by his accident. I traced the faded ink of his notes, his handwriting as familiar as my own heartbeat. "County Cork, where my grandmother's cottage still stands," he'd written. "We'll go there first, Maggie." I closed the book, my decision made. Bradley's cruise would sail without me, but I was charting my own course, one that would take me far beyond the Mediterranean. The next morning, I began packing not for a cruise, but for a journey with no fixed destination. I folded the coral-painted dreams of my cruise wardrobe into a suitcase, added David's travel books, and tucked in a photograph of us laughing on our honeymoon. The house felt different, lighter, as if it too sensed the shift. I wasn't just leaving behind a betrayal. I was stepping into a mystery I'd been too afraid to explore, the mystery of myself. As I zipped the suitcase shut, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Bradley. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk about this." I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the backyard where the swing set creaked in the breeze. The rusted chains swayed, whispering memories of a boy who'd once promised to build a world for us both. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as a burden. But I wasn't a burden. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was about to unravel the greatest mystery of all. What happens when a woman stops living for others and starts living for herself? The cracked screen of my phone lay on the kitchen table, its fractured glass catching the flicker of the pendant light like a shattered mirror, reflecting my fractured world. Bradley's text: "You're uninvited to our cruise, Mom." Ashley doesn't want to babysit an old lady, burned in my mind, each word a splinter embedding deeper into my heart. But as I sat there, the house quiet, except for the faint creak of the swing set outside, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just pain. It was clarity, sharp and cold as a winter's edge, whispering that this moment was not an end, but a beginning. A mystery had been unveiled, and I, Margaret Thompson, was no longer content to play the role of the overlooked mother. I rose from the table. my footsteps deliberate as I crossed to the kitchen drawer where I kept the important papers, bills, tax records, and buried beneath them the deed to the house on Elmwood Street. The paper felt heavy in my hands, its edges worn, but its power intact. 5 years ago, I'd given Bradley and Ashley that house as a wedding gift. A three-bedroom colonial with ivy climbing its walls and a garden I'd imagined would bloom with their future. But the deed inked in my name alone was more than a gift. It was a packed one that demanded respect and gratitude, conditions my son had just shattered with a single text. I spread the deed across the table, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes like runes from an ancient spellbook. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd been meticulous when I signed it, guided by an instinct I couldn't name at the time. Now that instinct felt like foresight, a whisper from the universe that I'd need this leverage someday. The clause was clear. The gift is contingent upon the recipient's continued respect and care for the gift giver. Bradley's text wasn't just cruel, it was a violation, a breach that gave me the right to reclaim what was mine. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting a story that had gone terribly wrong. The phone buzzed again, Bradley's name flashing like a warning. I ignored it, letting his voicemail join the first, his voice, a distant echo of the boy who'd once clung to me during thunderstorms. Instead, I dialed Margaret Caldwell, my attorney, whose number I hadn't called since we settled David's estate after his death. Her voice, crisp and steady, answered on the second ring. "Margaret." "It's late," she said, a hint of concern and softening her professional tone. "Everything okay? I need to see you," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "It's about the Elmwood Street house." A pause then. "The house you gave Bradley and Ashley." "What's happened?" "I'll explain tomorrow," I said. "Can we meet first thing?" "Of course," she replied, her curiosity palpable. 8 o'clock. "Perfect." I hung up and stood in the kitchen, the deed still in my hands. The house around me felt different, as if it too sensed the shift. The walls, once filled with memories of Bradley's laughter and David's quiet strength, now seemed to hold their breath, waiting for me to decide what came next. I walked to the living room where David's old travel books lined a shelf, their spines cracked from years of dreaming. I pulled one down its pages, smelling of dust and possibility. Ireland, County Cork. David had written in the margin, his handwriting a ghost that reached across time. "Maggie, we'll dance under the stars here someday." A pang of longing hit me, not just for David, but for the woman I'd been when he was alive. The woman who'd believed in adventures, who'd laughed without fear, who'd dreamed of a life beyond the roles of mother and widow. Bradley's text had cracked more than my phone. It had cracked the facade I'd built, revealing a truth I'd buried. I'd been living for him, not for myself. But no more. The next morning, I drove to Margaret Caldwell's office at Baez, the deed tucked in my purse like a talisman. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain, as if the world mirrored the storm brewing inside me. Her office was a sanctuary of order glass walls, mahogany furniture, and a view of the city that felt both distant and intimate. Margaret greeted me with a warm smile, but her eyes were sharp, searching for the story behind my call. "Tell me everything," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. I told her about the text, the cruise, the years of quiet sacrifices I had made to keep Bradley's world stable. I told her about the house, the gift I'd given out of love, and the conditions I had written into the deed, conditions I'd never thought I'd need to enforce. As I spoke, I felt the weight of 30 years as a single mother, the nights I'd stayed up sewing Bradley's costumes for school plays, the mornings I'd driven him to architecture competitions, the dreams I'd shelved to ensure his soared. Margaret listened, her pen tapping a slow rhythm against her notepad. When I finished, She leaned back, her expression a mix of sympathy and calculation. "You're within your rights to reclaim the property," she said. "The clause about respect and care is legally binding, and Bradley's text could be argued as a clear violation." But Margaret, this is a big step. It's not just about the house, it's about your relationship with your son. Are you sure? I met her gaze, my resolve, as unyielding as the oak tree in my backyard. I've never been more sure. This isn't about punishment. It's about reminding him who I am and who I've always been. She nodded, a spark of admiration in her eyes. "Then let's get to work. We'll need to notify Bradley and Ashley, prepare the paperwork, and brace for pushback. They won't take this lightly." "I know," I said, "but neither will I." We spent the next hour reviewing the deed, its clauses as sharp as thorns. Margaret outlined the process, a formal notice to Bradley and Ashley, a review of their payments toward the house, mortgage, taxes, improvements, and the potential for a full reclamation if they contested. The house wasn't just a gift. It was a trust, one they'd betrayed. As we worked, I felt a strange energy in the room, as if the air itself hummed with possibility. It wasn't just legal documents we were handling. It was the rewriting of my story, the reclaiming of a power I'd forgotten I possessed. When I left Margaret's office, the clouds had parted, and a sliver of sunlight broke through, casting long shadows on the pavement. I drove home, my mind racing with plans not just for the house, but for myself. The travel books on my shelf called to me, their pages, whispering of places David and I had promised to visit. Ireland, France, Italy, destinations that felt like fragments of a dream I'd buried with him. But dreams don't die. They wait. And mine were stirring alive with a magic I couldn't yet name. Back home, I opened the travel book to Ireland again, my fingers lingering on David's note about County Cork. The words seemed to glow, as if imbued with a promise that transcended time. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice, low and warm, urging me to go, to live, to become the woman he'd always seen in me. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with echoes of a life I'd lived, and a life I could still claim. That evening, I sat in David's old study, a room I'd avoided since his death. The mahogany desk was cluttered with memories. His fountain pen, a stack of architectural magazines. Bradley had left behind a photograph of the three of us at a lake, our smiles frozen in a moment when we were whole. I opened the drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal, one David had given me on our 10th anniversary. Its pages were blank, a canvas for stories we'd never written together. I picked up his pen and began to write not a diary, but a plan, a map for the journey ahead. The phone rang again. Bradley's number flashing insistently. I let it go to voicemail, his voice strained with a mix of guilt and defensiveness. "Mom, I know you're upset, but Ashley just thought the cruise would be more romantic without— Look, call me back, please." I didn't. Instead, I wrote in the journal, Ireland, County Cork. A cottage by the sea. A new beginning. The words felt like a spell, each letter binding me to a future I could shape. The next day, I met Margaret again, this time to finalize the notice of reclamation. She'd drafted a letter to Bradley and Ashley, formal, but unmistakable in its intent. "This will shake them," she warned, handing me the document. "They'll think you're bluffing at first." "I'm not bluffing," I said, signing my name with a flourish that felt like a declaration. "This is about more than a house. It's about respect." Margaret smiled, a rare crack in her professional facade. "You're different, Margaret. Stronger. Whatever's driving you, it's working." I didn't tell her about the whispers I had started to hear. Not voices exactly, but a sense of guidance, as if the house itself or David's memory or some deeper force was urging me forward. It was a mystery I couldn't explain, but it felt real, like a thread pulling me toward a truth I was only beginning to uncover. That afternoon, I drove to the Elmwood Street house, parking across the street to avoid being seen. The Colonial stood proud, its ivy-clad walls glowing in the fading light. I'd chosen it for Bradley and Ashley because it reminded me of the home David and I had dreamed of, a place for family, for love, for roots. But as I watched a curtain twitch in the upstairs window, I realized it had become something else, a symbol of my erasure, a place where I'd been reduced to an afterthought. A car pulled into the driveway, Bradley's sleek and black, a contrast to the rusting swing set in my own backyard. He stepped out, his shoulders tense, his phone pressed to his ear. Ashley followed, her expression unreadable, her arms crossed as if shielding herself from an unseen threat. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language spoke of strain of secrets. Something was wrong, something beyond the text, and the mystery of it tugged at me like a tide. I drove away before they could spot me, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and curiosity. What had changed? Bradley. Was it Ashley's influence or something deeper, something I'd missed in the years I'd spent being the perfect mother? The questions swirled, each one a piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. That night, I packed a small suitcase not for the cruise, but for a journey I hadn't yet defined. I folded my cruise outfits carefully, their bright colors, a rebellion against the grayness of Bradley's betrayal. I added David's travel books, the journal, and a locket he'd given me, its tiny clasp holding a photo of us dancing under a harvest moon. The house felt alive around me, its creaks and sighs a chorus of encouragement. I wasn't just reclaiming a house, I was reclaiming myself, and the path ahead was as mysterious as it was exhilarating. The next morning, Margaret called with an update. "The notice has been sent," she said. "Bradley and Ashley will receive it today. I've also started the process to review their payments toward the house. If they contest, we'll need to prepare for a legal fight." "Let them contest," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready." She chuckled softly. "I believe you are. But Margaret, be careful. There's something about this that feels bigger than a family dispute. Call it a lawyer's instinct." Her words lingered as I hung up, a shiver running down my spine. Bigger than a family dispute. The phrase echoed the whispers I'd been hearing, the sense that Bradley's text was only the surface of a deeper truth. I looked at the journal on my desk, its pages now filled with plans and questions. Who is Bradley now? What is he hiding? And who am I, if not his mother? I opened the travel book again, my eyes drawn to a photograph of a cliffside cottage in County Cork, its windows glowing against a stormy sky. It felt like a beacon, a place where answers might wait. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing: I was no longer the woman who'd arranged daisies for a son who'd forgotten her. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was ready to unravel the mystery of my own strength. As I closed the book, a breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the guest room. It felt like a sign, a promise that the path I was choosing was the right one. Bradley's text had broken something, but it had also set something free. And I was about to discover what that something was. The notice of reclamation was mailed to Bradley and Ashley that morning, a single sheet of paper that carried the weight of 30 years of sacrifice. I, Margaret Thompson, stood on the porch of my home, watching the mail truck disappear down the street, its red taillights winking like the eyes of a creature retreating into the dusk. The air was heavy with the scent of impending rain, and the swing set in my backyard creaked as if whispering secrets only it could understand. The deed to the Elmwood Street house, still legally mine, was no longer just a document. It was a talisman, a key to unlocking the woman I had buried beneath the role of mother. Bradley's cruel text. You're uninvited to our cruise, Mom. Ashley doesn't want to babysit an old lady had cracked open a door, and I was stepping through it into a mystery I was only beginning to unravel. I returned inside the house quieter than it had ever been, as if it too sensed the shift. My suitcase, packed with the coral dresses and wide-brimmed hats I had bought for the cruise, sat by the door. But it wasn't for the Mediterranean anymore. It was for a journey I hadn't yet named, one that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. David's travel books lay open on the kitchen table, their pages glowing under the pendant light like manuscripts from a forgotten era. Ireland, County Cork. His handwriting promised where the sea sings, and the cliffs hold stories older than time. I traced the words, feeling a pull I couldn't explain, as if the books themselves were guiding me toward a destiny I'd long ignored. Margaret Caldwell. My attorney called at noon, her voice crisp but tinged with excitement. "The notice has been delivered," she said. "Bradley and Ashley should have it by now. I've also contacted Patricia Wells, the real estate agent you recommended. She's ready to list the Elmwood Street house as soon as you give the word." "Then give it," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside me. "I want it done quickly." Margaret paused, and I could almost see her raising an eyebrow. "You're moving fast, Margaret. Are you sure you don't want to give them a chance to respond first?" "They've had 5 years to respond," I said. "They responded with a text that called me a burden." "I'm done waiting," she chuckled, a sound that carried both admiration and caution. "Fair enough. Patricia says a 3-bedroom colonial in that neighborhood will sell in days, maybe hours. I'll have the listing papers ready by tomorrow. But be prepared, Bradley's not going to take this lying down. I know I said, but neither am I, as I hung up my phone, buzzed with another voicemail from Bradley. His voice was sharper now, laced with panic. "Mom, what's this about the house? I just got a letter from your lawyer. Call me back. This isn't funny." I didn't call back. Instead, I walked to the guest room, where the single rose I'd placed in the vase stood defiant, its thorns catching the light like tiny blades. The daisies I had arranged before Bradley's text were gone, swept away like the illusions I'd clung to. I was no longer arranging flowers for a son who didn't see me. I was arranging my life. The next morning, I met Patricia Wells at a coffee shop, her energy as bright as the sun breaking through the clouds. She spread photos of the Elmwood Street house across the table, its ivy-clad facade and wide windows gleaming like a promise. "This is a gem," she said, her pen circling details on the listing draft. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a garden that's practically a painting. We'll have offers by Monday, maybe sooner. Cash buyers are circling already. Then list it." I said, signing the agreement with a hand that didn't tremble. "I want it sold before the week is out." Patricia's eyes widened, but she nodded. "You're not messing around, are you?" "Not anymore," I said. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of the woman I'd been before David's death, a woman who laughed under starlight, who dreamed of adventures, who believed her life had value beyond what she could give to others. As I drove home, my phone buzzed incessantly. Bradley's number, then Ashley's, then Bradley again. I let each call go to voicemail, their messages growing more frantic with each attempt. "Mom, this is crazy." Bradley's voice cracked. "You can't sell our house. We need to talk." Ashley's message was colder, sharper. "Margaret, this is a mistake. Call us before you do something you'll regret." I didn't reply. Their panic was a distant echo, a storm on the horizon I no longer feared. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. I booked a room at the Maple Grove Inn, a bed and breakfast in Vermont, 40 acres of woodland and quiet ponds that promised solitude and healing. I needed to step away from the house, from the memories, from the weight of Bradley's betrayal. The inn's website showed a rose-colored room with a four-poster bed and windows overlooking a pond where geese gathered at dawn. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could begin to unravel the mystery of who I was without the roles that had defined me. I packed lightly, choosing clothes that made me feel alive. Bright scarves, a linen dress, boots that could carry me through unknown paths. I added David's travel books, the leather journal, and the locket, its tiny photo of us dancing a reminder of the woman I'd been. As I zipped the suitcase, the house seemed to sigh its walls, releasing a breath they'd held for years. I looked at the swing set through the window, its rusted chains swaying in the breeze, and whispered, "I'm not leaving you. I'm finding me." The drive to Vermont was a blur of autumn colors, maples ablaze in red and gold, their leaves falling like pages from a story I was rewriting. The Maple Grove Inn was more beautiful than its photos, its stone facade nestled among trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Sarah, the owner, greeted me with a warmth that felt like coming home. She was my age, her silver hair braided loosely, her eyes carrying the wisdom of someone who'd reinvented herself. "You look like you're running towards something," she said, pouring me coffee in the inn's cozy kitchen. "Or away from something," I replied, smiling faintly. "Maybe both," she nodded, her gaze knowing. "This place has a way of helping you figure that out. People come here when they're at a crossroads. You're not the first." I settled into the rose room, its walls painted a soft blush that caught the morning light. The four-poster bed was draped in lace, and the windows framed a pond where geese glided silently, their reflections rippling like memories. I opened David's journal and wrote Vermont Day 1. "I'm here to find the woman I forgot." Bradley's text was a wound, but it's also a key. "What's the lock it opens?" That night, I dreamed of the Elmwood Street house, but it wasn't the house I knew. Its walls pulsed with a strange light, and the ivy seemed to writhe like living vines whispering my name. I woke with a start, the air heavy with the scent of lavender, though there were no flowers in the room. The dream lingered, a puzzle piece I couldn't place, but it strengthened my resolve. Something bigger was at play, something beyond a family dispute, and I was determined to uncover it. The next morning, Patricia called with news. "The house is listed," she said. "We've got 3 showings today and 2 cash offers already. It's moving faster than I expected." "Good," I said, watching the geese through my window. "Accept the highest offer. I want it done." "You're sure?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Once it's sold, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," I said. "I want to go forward." By noon, the house was under contract, a cash sale set to close in 10 days. The proceeds would be held in trust with Bradley and Ashley's payments, mortgage, taxes, improvements calculated and returned to them. I wasn't stealing from them. I was reclaiming what was mine, ensuring they weren't left destitute, but making it clear that gifts come with responsibilities. Margaret Caldwell called to confirm the details, her voice laced with a mix of awe and amusement. "You're playing hardball, Margaret. I've never seen you like this. You've never seen me betrayed like this," I replied, and she laughed, a sound that echoed my own growing strength. Bradley's calls became relentless, his voicemails a crescendo of desperation. "Mom," Patricia Wells called. "Our house is for sale. This has to be a mistake. Call me back." Ashley's messages were rarer but sharper, her tone edging toward accusation. "Margaret, we're packing for the cruise. We don't have time for this. Fix it." I let each message pile up a chorus of consequences they hadn't anticipated. I wasn't ignoring them out of spite. I was giving them space to feel the weight of their choices, just as I was feeling the weight of mine. At the inn, I spent my days walking the woodland trails, the crunch of leaves under my boots a rhythm that matched my thoughts. Sarah became a friend, her stories of leaving corporate law to run the inn a mirror to my own reinvention. One morning, over scones and coffee, she showed me a photo album of past guests, men and women who'd come to Maple Grove at turning points in their lives. Divorced artists, widowed chefs, couples rediscovering love after loss. Every person here was running from something or toward something, she said, her eyes soft. What about you, Margaret? I thought of Bradley's text, the deed, the dream of the pulsing house. I'm running toward myself. I said the words surprising me with their truth, and maybe toward answers I didn't know I needed. She smiled, her gaze drifting to the pond outside. This place has a way of giving you those answers. Listen to it. That night, I dreamed again, this time of David. He stood on a cliff in County Cork, the sea crashing below his eyes, bright with the love we'd shared. Maggie, he said, his voice clear as if he were in the room, you're stronger than you know. Follow the thread. I woke with tears on my cheeks, the scent of salt air lingering in the room. The thread. It was a phrase he'd used when we planned our travels, a way of describing the path life lays before you if you're brave enough to follow it. I opened the journal and wrote, "The thread is pulling me to Ireland." But what's pulling Bradley? What's he hiding? The next day, I drove to a nearby library, its shelves a haven of quiet wisdom. I used their computer to research County Cork, booking a flight to Shannon Airport for 2 weeks from now. The librarian, a woman with silver braids and kind eyes, helped me print my boarding pass. First time to Ireland, she asked. First time anywhere, really, I admitted. My husband and I planned to travel after retirement, but life had other plans. She nodded, her smile wistful. My husband was the same, always waiting for someday. I learned after he passed that someday never comes unless you make it today. Her words echoed David's, a confirmation of the path I was choosing. I returned to the inn, my heart lighter, my purpose clearer. The Elmwood Street house was sold, the proceeds secured, and I was free from the weight of Bradley's ingratitude, free to discover who Margaret Thompson could be when she wasn't defined by others' needs. But the mystery lingered. Bradley's voicemails had shifted from panic to something darker, a desperation that hinted at secrets beyond a simple family spat. I listened to his latest message as I sat by the pond, the geese gliding silently under a fading sky. Mom, you don't understand what you're doing. Please call me. We're flying home early. Don't do this. His voice trembled, not just with fear, but with something heavier, something that made my skin prickle. Needle, I didn't call back. Instead, I opened the journal and wrote Bradley's hiding something. The house, the text, the panic, it's all connected. But to what? The wind stirred, carrying the scent of lavender again, though the nearest flowers were miles away. It was a sign, a whisper from the universe, or David, or something older, urging me to keep going, to follow the thread. As I packed for my return to Ohio, preparing to finalize the house sale and my travel plans, I felt a shift in the air, a hum of possibility that was both thrilling and unsettling. The Elmwood Street house was no longer mine, but neither was the woman who'd lived for others. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was stepping into a story where I was the hero, not the sacrifice. The mystery of Bradley's desperation, the pull of Ireland, the whispers of the house, they were all pieces of a puzzle I was ready to solve. And as I drove away from Maple Grove, the rose in my room still standing tall, I knew one thing: the answers were waiting, and I was strong enough to find them. The Maple Grove Inn faded in my rearview mirror, its rose-colored walls swallowed by Vermont's fiery autumn trees. Margaret Thompson, drove back to Ohio with a heart both heavy and light, the weight of Bradley's betrayal balanced by the freedom I'd found in reclaiming my life. The Elmwood Street house was sold its proceeds, secured in a trust, and my flight to Ireland was booked for 2 weeks from now. Yet, as the miles stretched behind me, a whisper lingered in the air, a scent of lavender untraceable that followed me like a ghost. It wasn't just the house or Bradley's cruel text, "You're uninvited to our cruise, Mom." Ashley doesn't want to babysit an old lady that haunted me. It was the sense that something larger, something hidden was unraveling, and I was both the seeker and the answer. Back in Ohio, the air was crisp, the sky a bruised gray that mirrored the storm brewing in my family. My phone had been silent for days, Bradley and Ashley's frantic voicemails replaced by an eerie quiet that felt like the calm before a tempest. I settled into my home, the familiar creak of the floorboards grounding me as I unpacked David's travel books and my journal now filled with plans for County Cork. The swing set in the backyard swayed in the wind, its rusted chains a reminder of the boy Bradley had been and the man he'd become. I was no longer arranging daisies for him. I was planting roses for myself, thorns and all. The call came at dusk, the horizon bleeding red, as if the world itself sensed the confrontation ahead. Bradley's number flashed on my cracked phone screen, and this time I answered. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual confidence. "Mom, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for days." "What's happening? Why is our house for sale?" I stood by the window watching the swing set's shadow stretch across the lawn. "Bradley," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "I told you we'd discuss this when you returned. How was the cruise? How was the cruise?" His tone cracked with disbelief. "Mom, our house is being sold. Ashley hasn't stopped crying since we found out. She's making herself sick over this." "I'm sorry Ashley's upset," I said, and I meant it, though my heart didn't waver. "But you both made your feelings about me clear. I'm responding accordingly." "What feelings?" He snapped, a hint of indignation is creeping in. "Mom, you're being dramatic." Ashley just thought the cruise would be more romantic with just the two of us. It wasn't personal. I closed my eyes, the words of his text flashing in my mind like a curse. "Bradley, you called me an old lady who needed babysitting. You uninvited me from a family vacation via text with less care than you'd cancel a dentist appointment. How was that not personal?" Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy like a fog hiding truths I couldn't yet see. In the background, I heard Ashley's voice, shrill and demanding, though her words were indistinct. The tension in their voices wasn't just about the house. It was something deeper, something desperate. "Mom, just don't sell the house," Bradley pleaded. "Please. We'll pay you rent if that's what you want. We'll figure something out. The house sold this morning." I said, my voice steady as stone. "Closing is Tuesday." The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had dropped. When Bradley spoke again, his voice was small, almost childlike. "Where are we supposed to live?" "I don't know, son." I said, my tone gentle but firm. "But you're both resourceful adults. I suspect you'll figure it out." I hung up, my heart pounding not with anger, but with a strange mix of relief and curiosity. Bradley's desperation wasn't just about losing the house. It was a thread in a larger tapestry, one I was determined to unravel. The lavender scent drifted through the room again, untraceable, as if the house itself was urging me to keep going, to follow the mystery to its source. The next morning, I met Margaret Caldwell at her office. the glass walls reflecting the storm clouds outside. She greeted me with a bottle of champagne and a smile that held both pride and caution. "You've done it, Margaret," she said, settling into David's old chair, which she'd borrowed for the occasion. "The house is sold, the proceeds are in trust, and Bradley and Ashley's payments are being calculated for return. You're not stealing from them, you're reclaiming what's yours. In 30 years of practicing law, I have never seen such an elegant move." "It's not revenge," I said, though a smile tugged at my lips. "It's consequences. Bradley chose to treat me like a burden. I'm choosing to remind him I'm a blessing." Margaret raised her glass, her eyes gleaming. "To consequences, then. And to you, Margaret Thompson, for remembering who you are." We reviewed the trust documents, ensuring every detail was perfect. The sale had cleared enough to fund 2 years of travel, combined with my teacher's pension and David's life insurance. I showed Margaret the travel brochures I'd collected: Ireland first, then maybe France, Italy, wherever the wind took me. David always said his grandmother's cottage in County Cork was the most beautiful place on earth. I set my fingers tracing the photo of a cliffside home, its windows glowing like beacons. "Where will you go after Ireland?" Margaret asked, her curiosity genuine. "I don't know," I admitted. "But that's the point. For the first time, I'm not planning for anyone but myself." She nodded, her expression softening. "And if Bradley wants to reconcile, I considered this the weight of 30 years as his mother pressing against the freedom I'd found. He'll have to prove he's learned something about respect and humility, the difference between having a mother and deserving one." As I left her office, the storm broke, rain lashing the city in sheets. I drove home, the wipers slicing through the downpour, my mind racing with questions. Bradley's desperation, Ashley's coldness, the strange hum in the air. There was more to this than a family dispute. The lavender scent followed me, faint but persistent, as if David, or the house, or some ancient force was guiding me toward a truth I wasn't yet ready to face. 2 days later, I boarded a flight to Shannon Airport, Ireland. The plane soared above the clouds, and I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years, as if I'd shed the weight of Bradley's betrayal like a snake sheds its skin. My journal lay open on my lap, its pages filled with plans and questions. What is Bradley hiding? Why the panic? And what is this thread I'm following? The scent of lavender lingered, though my locket was tucked safely in my bag. Its tiny photo of David and me, a talisman of my own. County Cork was everything David had promised: wild cliffs, a sea that sang with secrets, and air that tasted of salt and freedom. I rented a cottage overlooking the Irish Sea, its stone walls weathered but warm, its windows framing a view that felt like a painting come to life. The locals welcomed me, their accents lilting, as they shared stories of the land of spirits that lingered in the cliffs of lives reborn under the Irish sky. I took cooking classes in Cork, learning to knead dough with women who laughed like they'd never known sorrow. I learned to knit in Galway, my fingers clumsy but determined, each stitch a step toward a new self. And in Dublin, I met Patrick, a retired professor with eyes that sparkled like the sea and stories that made my heart ache for the life David and I had planned. Patrick took me to hidden corners of Dublin cobblestone alleys, where musicians played haunting melodies, pubs where the air hummed with history. One evening, over a glass of whiskey, he asked, "What brought you here, Margaret?" "Not just to Ireland, but to this moment." I hesitated, the weight of Bradley's text still raw. "A betrayal," I said finally, "and a need to find out who I am when I'm not someone's mother." He nodded, his gaze steady. You're not running from something, you're running toward it. That's rare. His words echoed Sarah's from the Maple Grove Inn, and I felt the thread again pulling me toward a truth I couldn't yet name. The lavender scent returned that night, stronger in the cottage, though there were no flowers nearby. I dreamed of the Elmwood Street house, its walls pulsing with light, the ivy whispering my name. David stood in the doorway, his smile both sad and proud. "Keep going, Maggie," he said. "The answers are closer than you think." I woke with a start, my heart racing. The dream felt like more than a memory. It was a message, a piece of the puzzle I was assembling. I opened my journal and wrote, "The house knows something. Bradley knows something. And I'm going to find out what." 3 months into my Irish adventure, a letter arrived at my Dublin hotel forwarded through 3 previous addresses, like a missive from another world. The return address, Caldwell and Associates Legal Services, made my hands tremble. I sat by the window, rain pattering against the glass, and opened it with a sense of dread and anticipation. Margaret Caldwell's message was brief but earth-shattering. Bradley had filed a lawsuit claiming elder abuse and demanding I return the house sale proceeds. He alleged I was mentally incompetent when I sold the property, a desperate ploy to undo what I'd done. But that wasn't the shocking part. Attached to the letter were divorce papers from Ashley painting a picture that turned my world upside down. She claimed Bradley had manipulated me to fund their lifestyle while hiding a secret life of gambling debts, $87,000, owed to creditors, some of whom weren't the patient type. Bank statements and credit reports spilled from the envelope evidence of casino visits, online betting accounts, and maxed-out credit cards. My responsible architect's son, the boy who'd dreamed of building enduring structures, had been living a lie, drowning in debts he'd kept from his wife and me. I sat back the rain, a soft drumbeat against the window, and laughed, a sharp, tearful sound that echoed in the small room. The irony was exquisite, almost scripted by some cosmic playwright. I'd sold the house thinking it was a stand for my worth, a consequence for Bradley's cruelty. But it was more than that. It was survival, a move that had unknowingly protected me from being dragged into his web of deceit. The lavender scent filled the room stronger now, as if affirming my choice. The house, or David, or something greater, had guided me, and I'd listened. I called Margaret Caldwell, my voice steady despite the shock. "Is it true?" I asked. "The gambling!" Every word she said. Ashley provided the evidence. Bradley owes $87,000, and some of his creditors are dangerous. He's claiming your mental state caused him stress leading to his gambling. It's a weak case, but he's desperate. "And Ashley?" I asked, my mind racing. "She's furious," Margaret said. "She didn't know about the gambling until after you sold the house. She's filing for divorce, asking for spousal support, and half their remaining assets, which isn't much. A car with payments due and about $4,000 in savings." I paced the room, the Irish Sea a restless gray, beyond the window. Bradley's text wasn't just cruelty. It was a desperate act by a man drowning in his own mistakes. He'd uninvited me from the cruise, not to hurt me, but to keep me at a distance to hide the truth of his unraveling life. The mystery I'd sensed was real, and it was darker than I had imagined. "What does Bradley want from me?" I asked. "He wants you to return home and give him power of attorney over the house sale funds," Margaret said. "He's claiming the gambling was stress-related, caused by worrying about you after David's death." The audacity took my breath away. I thought of Patrick of the cooking classes of the cottage in County Cork, where I'd begun to rediscover myself. I'd spent 3 months becoming a woman who didn't need to buy her son's respect or her daughter-in-law's tolerance. "He's not getting a cent," I said. "Not like this." Margaret's silence was approving. I'll prepare a response to the lawsuit. But Margaret, be careful. Bradley's in deep and desperate people do desperate things. I hung up and walked along the River Liffey Dublin's lights, shimmering in the twilight. Street musicians played haunting Irish tunes, their notes weaving through the air like threads of a spell. I'd come to Ireland to find myself, but I'd also found questions about Bradley, about the house, about the whispers that followed me. The lavender scent was there again, faint but undeniable, as if urging me to keep digging to uncover the truth. That night, I dreamed of the Elmwood Street house again, its walls pulsing with a light that felt alive, its ivy curling toward me like fingers. David stood in the garden, holding the deed, his eyes bright with a knowledge I couldn't grasp. "The house isn't just a house, Maggie," he said. "It's a mirror. Look closer." I woke with a gasp, the scent of salt air filling the room, though the sea was miles away. The dream was a clue, a piece of the puzzle, but I didn't yet know what it meant. I spent the next day in Dublin's libraries researching the history of the Elmwood Street house, driven by an instinct I couldn't explain. The records were sparse, but one detail caught my eye. The house had been built on land once owned by a woman named Ethna, a healer who'd vanished under mysterious circumstances a century ago. Locals believed her spirit lingered, protecting those who honored her land. I laughed it off, but the lavender scent returned stronger, as if Ethna herself was watching. 2 days later, I flew back to Ohio, not to rescue Bradley, but to face him as the woman I'd become. Margaret Caldwell met me at the airport, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "You look different," she said, noting my shorter, stylish haircut and the confidence in my stride. "Ireland agrees with you." "Everything agrees with me," I said, smiling. "That's the point." Bradley was waiting in Margaret's conference room, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in 3 months. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his clothes hung loose, and his hands trembled as he reached for his coffee. This wasn't the confident architect who'd sent that cruel text. This was a man who'd hit bottom and was still falling. "Mom, thank God you came back," he said, standing to hug me. I remained seated, my gaze steady. "Sit down, Bradley," I said. "We need to discuss your situation." Margaret spread documents across the table, bank statements, credit reports, loan agreements, divorce papers. The evidence of Bradley's secret life lay bare a map of his descent into gambling. $87,000, I said, reading from the credit summary. "How long have you been gambling?" His face flushed, his eyes darting away. It started small. Poker nights with guys from work, then online betting. It got out of hand after Dad died. David died 5 years ago. I said, my voice calm but cutting. "So your solution to my grief was to develop a gambling addiction, lie to your wife, and treat your mother like a burden." "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice breaking. And the text about the cruise, I was stressed about money. Ashley kept saying it would be too expensive with 3 people. Margaret cleared her throat. "Bradley, your mother isn't here to hear excuses. You're claiming she was mentally incompetent when she sold the house. That's a serious accusation." His face went pale. "I had to say something. These people I owe money to, they're not patient. They're talking about broken legs worse." "Whose fault is that?" I asked, my tone icy. "You want me to give you the house money to fix your mistakes. What do I get in return?" He looked confused, as if the question was foreign. "You get your son back, your family." I leaned back, thinking of Patrick of the cliffs of County Cork, of the woman I'd become. "Bradley, I've spent 3 months in Ireland discovering I already have everything I need. I don't need to buy your respect." The room fell silent, the air heavy with the weight of truth. The lavender scent returned faint but unmistakable, as if affirming my words. Bradley's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no urge to comfort him. The mystery of his desperation was clearer now, but it wasn't the whole story. There was something else, something the house or Ethna or David wanted me to see. As I left the office, the rain had stopped, and the sky was clear stars winking like secrets waiting to be told. I knew the confrontation with Bradley was only the beginning. The lawsuit, the gambling, the divorce, they were threads in a larger tapestry, and I was determined to follow them to the truth, no matter wherefore or which of them led. The rain had stopped, but the air in Ohio was heavy, as if the storm had left behind a residue of secrets. Margaret Thompson, stood in my kitchen, the letter from Margaret Caldwell still clutched in my hand, its contents a seismic shift in the mystery I'd been unraveling. Bradley, my son, had filed a lawsuit claiming elder abuse, alleging I was mentally incompetent when I sold the Elmwood Street house. But the real shock was Ashley's divorce papers, revealing Bradley's hidden gambling debts, $87,000, owed to dangerous creditors, a secret life of casinos and online betting that had spiraled out of control. The lavender scent ever present since Bradley's cruel text, "You're uninvited to our cruise, Mom." Ashley doesn't want to babysit an old lady, lingered in the room, stronger now, as if urging me to act. The house, or David, or perhaps the spirit of Ethna the healer, tied to the Elmwood land, was guiding me toward a truth I was only beginning to grasp. I sat at the kitchen table. David's travel books opened to a page about County Cork, where I'd return in a month. The journal beside it was filled with my questions. What is Bradley hiding beyond the debts? Why the lawsuit? What does the house know? The swing set outside creaked in the wind, its rusted chains a haunting echo of the boy Bradley had been. But the man he'd become was drowning, and I was no longer the mother who'd dive in to save him without question. I'd learned in Ireland through cooking classes, knitting lessons, and quiet evenings with Patrick that I was more than a mother. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was strong enough to face whatever came next. Margaret Caldwell's call came at dawn, her voice sharp with urgency. "Margaret, I've been digging into Bradley's creditors. 3 of his debts are to legitimate credit card companies, but the big ones, the ones he's terrified of, are tied to an illegal gambling operation. If you pay them, you could be charged with money laundering." I sat up in bed, the words jolting me awake. "Money laundering. What are you saying?" "I'm saying Bradley's in deeper than we thought," she said. "He's not just in financial trouble, he's in legal trouble. The FBI has been tracking this gambling ring for months. It's connected to organized crime, and Bradley's debts are part of their web. I've set up a meeting with an agent today. Can you be at my office by 10? I'll be there," I said. My heart pounding not with fear, but with a strange clarity. The lavender scent was strong now, as if the house itself was nodding in approval. I dressed quickly, choosing a linen dress and boots that made me feel like the woman I had rediscovered in Ireland, confident, unafraid, ready to follow the thread David had spoken of in my dreams. At Margaret's office, I met Agent Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman with a presence that commanded the room. She spread photographs and documents across the conference table, each one a piece of the puzzle I'd been chasing. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice calm but firm, "your son has been gambling with an illegal operation that launders money for organized crime. His debts aren't just to casinos, they're to people who use gambling to trap individuals into other illegal activities." I studied the photos, grainy images of men in dark suits, their faces half hidden in shadows, meeting in parking lots and back rooms. What kind of activities? I asked, my voice steady, despite the chill creeping up my spine. "Money laundering, mostly," Sarah said. "Bradley hasn't crossed that line yet, but he's being pressured. His sudden need for $87,000 isn't just about paying debts, it's about avoiding being forced into criminal work. These people don't just want money, they want compliance. I thought of Bradley's trembling hands, his desperate voicemails, the lawsuit claiming I was incompetent. It wasn't just about the house, it was about survival, a frantic attempt to escape a trap he'd built for himself. The lavender scent swirled around me, faint but undeniable, as if urging me to see the bigger picture. What happens if I give him the money I asked? Two problems, Sarah said, her eyes narrowing. First, it likely violates federal money laundering statutes. Second, it doesn't solve his problem. Paying them off would make Bradley a more valuable asset. They'd own him. She showed me more photos, respectable professionals, teachers, accountants, all trapped in the same web, their lives unraveled by small bets that grew into criminal entanglements. My heart ached for Bradley, but it was tempered by the strength I'd found in Ireland, the woman who'd learned to knit her own future. What are my options? I asked. Cooperate with our investigation, Sarah said. We need Bradley to wear a wire and meet his handlers. His cooperation could help us dismantle the entire operation while keeping him out of prison. But it's risky. He'd be walking into a lion's den. I left the FBI office with my head spinning, the weight of the decision pressing against me. 3 months ago, my biggest worry was a cruise I'd never take. Now I was being asked to orchestrate a sting to save my son from criminals. But something had changed in me, something forged in the cliffs of County Cork, in the laughter of Dublin pubs, in the quiet moments when I'd felt David's presence. I wasn't just Bradley's mother anymore. I was Margaret Thompson, and I knew the difference between helping and enabling. That evening, I called Bradley, arranging to meet at a coffee shop near my house, a neutral space, busy enough for privacy, public enough for safety. The lavender scent followed me as I drove, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. The coffee shop was crowded, the hum of conversation a shield against the tension I carried. Bradley arrived, looking worse than he had in Margaret's office, unshaven eyes, darting hands, clutching his phone like a lifeline. Mom, did you think about what I asked? He said, his voice low and urgent. These people, they're getting impatient. They know where Ashley works, where her sister lives. They've made it clear what happens if I don't pay by Friday. I studied him, seeing not the architect who'd dreamed of building lasting structures, but a man caught in a web of his own making. I know exactly who these people are, Bradley. I said, my voice calm but firm. I spent yesterday with the FBI learning about the illegal gambling operation you're tangled in. They don't just want your money. They want you as a permanent asset. His face went white, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his lips. FBI? Mom, what did you do? I found out the truth. I said, you're not just in debt. You're being groomed for criminal activity. These people are using your debts to trap you. But there's a way out if you're brave enough. His hands shook, his eyes wide with fear. A way out. Mom, these aren't white-collar criminals. They're dangerous. They'll hurt Ashley if I don't pay. The mention of Ashley sent a pang through me, not for Bradley, but for her caught in a nightmare she hadn't created. Bradley, there's a way to protect Ashley and yourself, I said. The FBI wants you to cooperate. Wear a wire, meet your handlers, help them build a case. It's your chance to break free. You want me to wear a wire. His voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. He lowered it, leaning closer. Mom, these people hurt anyone who crosses them. You don't understand. I understand more than you think, I said, reaching across the table to steady his trembling hands. You're already in danger. Ashley's already in danger. The only way out is through. He stared into his coffee, the steam rising like ghosts of his mistakes. Around us, the coffee shop hummed with normalcy. People laughing, clinking mugs, unaware that a few poor choices could lead to criminal entanglement and federal investigations. "What happens if I cooperate?" he asked. Finally, his voice small. "Agent Chen says you'll likely face charges for illegal gambling," he said. "But cooperation could mean probation instead of prison. More importantly, you'll be free from these people forever. If you don't, you become a criminal or worse." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in months. "How did I get here, Mom? How did I become the kind of person who threatens his own mother for money?" The question hit me like a wave, but it was the one I'd been waiting for him to ask. "You got here by making choices," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "and then making more choices to cover them up. But it's not too late to make different ones." My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. "Meeting arranged for tomorrow, 2 p.m. Is your son ready?" I showed Bradley the message, watching his face as fear battled with something that might have been resolve. "This is your chance to be the man your father raised you to be," I said. "The man I know you still are beneath all this." He swallowed hard, tears brimming in his eyes. "Will you come with me to the FBI meeting?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "But not to clean up your mess. I'll come as your mother, supporting you while you fix this yourself." He nodded, the tears spilling over. "I'm sorry, Mom. For the text, the house, for taking you for granted. I know," I said, the lavender scent swirling around me as if David or Ethne or the house itself was bearing witness. "Now let's get you out of this with your integrity intact." The FBI sting was set for 3 days later in a shopping center parking lot, a place mundane enough to mask the danger. I sat in Agent Chen's surveillance van, my heart pounding as Bradley, wired with recording equipment and carrying a briefcase of marked bills, walked toward a black sedan where 2 men waited. The lavender scent was faint, but present, a quiet reassurance that I was on the right path. Through the van's sophisticated equipment, we heard every word of the conversation, each syllable a thread in the tapestry of Bradley's redemption. "Your mother's house money will cover your current debt," one man said, his voice low and menacing. "But you'll be making regular deposits from now on. Think of it as your new job." Bradley's voice, steady despite his fear, followed the script Agent Chen had provided. "What if I want out after this payment?" Harsh laughter filled the van. "Nobody gets out, architect. You're too valuable now. Clean credit, respectable job, desperate enough to do what you're told." Agent Chen nodded to her team, and within seconds, FBI agents surrounded the sedan. I watched through binoculars as handcuffs snapped onto wrists, rights were read, and Bradley stood safely to the side, no longer a victim, but not yet free from consequences. My heart ached for him, but it was tempered by pride, not for the boy he'd been, but for the man he was trying to become. 2 hours later, we sat in the FBI office, Agent Chen, outlining the next steps. "The gambling ring is part of a larger operation that's defrauded victims across 3 states," she said. "Bradley's cooperation provided the final evidence we needed to dismantle it. He'll face charges for illegal gambling, but given his cooperation and the coercive circumstances, we're recommending probation and mandatory addiction counseling." Bradley looked exhausted but relieved, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had been lifted. "What about Ashley?" he asked. "Is she safe now?" "These individuals will be in federal custody for a long time," Sarah said. "The threats against your wife are no longer a concern." As we left the federal building, Bradley and I walked in silence toward my rental car. The man beside me was my son again, not the desperate stranger who'd sent that cruel text. "Mom," he said, stopping on the sidewalk, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but is there any chance we can rebuild our relationship? I faced him, the lavender scent, faint but present, a reminder of the journey I had taken. Bradley. I've learned something these past months. I can't rebuild our relationship for both of us. You'll have to prove through actions that you understand the difference between having a mother and deserving one. What does that mean? He asked, his voice small. It means respecting me as a person, not just as someone who meets your needs, I said. It means understanding that my life has value beyond what I can give you. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I'd like to try if you'll let me. I'm going back to Ireland next month, I said. I've rented a cottage in County Cork for 6 months. You're welcome to write letters, real letters, not texts, telling me about the work you're doing on yourself. Just letters for now. I need to keep discovering who I am when I'm not defined by being your mother. We hugged the embrace different from the ones we'd shared before. It felt like a beginning, not an ending, a tentative step toward a new story. As I drove away, the lavender scent lingered, a quiet promise that the thread I'd followed was leading me exactly where I needed to be. The Ohio sky was clear as I drove away from the federal building. The weight of the FBI sting operation lifting like fog burned away by morning sun. I, Margaret Thompson, had just watched my son Bradley take his first steps toward redemption. His cooperation with the FBI, dismantling a criminal gambling ring that had threatened to consume him. The lavender scent, my constant companion, since his cruel text, "You're uninvited to our cruise, Mom." Ashley doesn't want to babysit an old lady, lingered faintly in the car, a quiet affirmation that I'd followed the right thread. The mystery of Bradley's desperation, the house on Elmwood Street, and the whispers of David, or perhaps Ethna the healer, tied to its land, had led me here not just to save my son, but to save myself. I returned to my home, the familiar creak of the floorboards welcoming me like an old friend. The swing set in the backyard stood still under a starlit sky, its rusted chains no longer a reminder of loss, but a symbol of resilience. I opened David's journal, its pages now, a tapestry of my journey, notes from Vermont, sketches of County Cork's cliffs, questions about Bradley's secrets. The final entry, written before the sting, read, "The thread is leading me to truth." But whose truth, Bradley's or mine? Tonight, I added both, and the truth is freedom. The next morning, I packed for Ireland, my suitcase lighter than before. The coral dresses and wide-brimmed hats I had bought for the cruise were joined by new treasures, a scarf knitted in Galway, a recipe book from my Cork cooking classes, a photograph of Patrick and me laughing in a Dublin pub. The locket David gave me, its tiny photo of us dancing under a harvest moon, hung around my neck, a talisman of the love that had shaped me and the strength I'd reclaimed. The house felt different, lighter, as if it too knew I was no longer the woman who'd arranged daisies for a son who didn't see her. Before leaving, I met Margaret Caldwell one last time. She handed me the final paperwork for the Elmwood Street house sale, her eyes twinkling with pride. "You've rewritten your story, Margaret," she said, pouring coffee in her glass-walled office. "Bradley's on probation, attending addiction counseling, and Ashley's withdrawn her divorce papers. They're trying to rebuild. What about you?" "I'm going back to Ireland," I said, my voice steady. "I've rented a cottage in County Cork for 6 months. After that, maybe France, Italy. Who knows? I'm not planning for anyone but myself now." She raised her mug in a toast. To Margaret Thompson, who remembered she's more than a mother. As I drove to the airport, the lavender scent returned faint but unmistakable, as if David or Ethna or the house itself was saying goodbye. My flight to Shannon Airport was hours away, but I felt no rush. I was no longer running from betrayal or toward answers. I was simply living each moment a thread in a new tapestry. In County Cork, the cottage I'd rented was everything I'd dreamed: stone walls weathered by time, windows framing the Irish Sea's restless waves, a hearth that glowed with warmth. I settled in the rhythm of the tides, a lullaby that soothed the last remnants of pain. I wrote in my journal, cooked with local ingredients, and walked the cliffs where the wind seemed to whisper David's voice. "You're stronger than you know, Maggie." The lavender scent followed me stronger here, as if the land itself was part of the mystery I'd unraveled. 3 months later, a letter arrived, its envelope worn from its journey across the ocean. Bradley's handwriting was careful, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to the cruel text that had sparked this journey. I sat by the hearth, the fire crackling, and opened it with hands that no longer trembled. "Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to try. I'm in counseling now, learning why I let gambling take over my life. It wasn't just about money. It was about running from Dad's death, from the pressure to be the man he wanted me to be. I took you for granted, thinking you'd always be there to fix my mistakes. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Ashley and I are working things out. She's forgiven me, but it's slow. I want to rebuild with you too, if you'll let me. I'm trying to be the son you deserve. Bradley." I read the letter twice, tears blurring the ink. The boy who'd swung on the backyard set was still there, buried beneath the mistakes of the man he'd become. But I wasn't the same mother who'd rushed to rescue him. I'd learned in Ireland, in the laughter of new friends and the quiet of cliffside walks, that love doesn't mean erasing consequences. It means holding space for growth for both of us. I wrote back my words measured but kind. "Bradley, I'm proud of the steps you're taking. Keep writing, keep growing. I'm in Ireland, discovering who I am. We'll rebuild when you show me you understand what it means to deserve a mother. For now, live your truth, and I'll live mine." I sealed the letter and walked to the village postbox, the sea, a shimmering expanse under a twilight sky. The lavender scent was there, soft and approving, as if David or Ethna or the universe itself was nodding. I didn't need Bradley's forgiveness or his gratitude to feel whole. I was Margaret Thompson, a woman who'd faced betrayal, unraveled a mystery, and found her strength in the process. 6 months in Ireland passed like a dream, each day a brushstroke on the canvas of my new life. I wrote stories in my journal, not just of my travels, but of the woman I was becoming, someone who laughed without fear, who danced with Patrick under Dublin's starry skies, who no longer shrank to fit others' expectations. The Elmwood Street house, once a symbol of my sacrifice, was now a memory, its sale a liberation that had saved both Bradley and me. The whispers of Aethna the healer, who'd once owned its land, seemed to linger in the cliffs, a reminder that some gifts like strength, like truth, come from within. One evening, as I sat by the cottage hearth, a new letter arrived from Bradley. He wrote of his progress in counseling, his renewed commitment to Ashley, and his tentative steps toward a life free of gambling. "I'm learning to be honest, Mom," he wrote, "not just with you, but with myself. I hope one day you'll visit us, not as a burden, but as the incredible woman you are." I smiled, folding the letter carefully. It was a beginning, not a promise, but it was enough. I stepped outside the Irish Sea, stretching before me, its waves, singing a song older than time. The lavender scent was faint now, a gentle farewell from the forces that had guided me, David Aithne, or perhaps my own heart. I'd thought I was selling a house to teach Bradley a lesson, but I'd been saving both our lives. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to face their consequences, to grow into the person they're meant to be. As I walked along the cliffs, The stars above County Cork burned bright, each one a story waiting to be told. I was no longer the woman who'd received that cruel text 6 months ago, wondering what she'd done wrong. I was Margaret Thompson, weaving a new tapestry, one where I was the hero, not the sacrifice. And as the wind carried the scent of salt and lavender, I knew the thread I'd followed had led me home to myself.